Welcome. Wherever you find yourself in the day or night, take a moment to settle into a comfortable space. Let your body ease and your mind begin to drift softly. Imagine yourself stepping quietly through the mists of time, back to a world both distant and strangely familiar. In this video, I, historian Couch, your narrator, will take you on a slow, thoughtful journey into the shadowed corners of medieval Europe, into the lives of those touched by some of the most unusual and mysterious diseases ever recorded. These are stories of bodies and minds challenged by strange ailments, woven into the fabric of daily life, faith, and culture. As you listen, allow the rhythms of their world to unfold gently. Feel the cool stone walls, the scent of herbs hanging in thatched cottages, the soft murmur of prayers in ancient chapels. Let your imagination wander through these quiet moments where history breathes not only in grand events, but in the small, intimate experiences of suffering and care. This journey is not hurried. It moves slowly, like the turning of a page or the fading of twilight, inviting calm, reflection, and perhaps rest. Now, let us begin this passage together. The rhythm of the medieval day. The village was just beginning to stir. Beneath the thatched rooftops of cottages, softened by moss and thyme, the air was cool with the breath of early morning. A low mist clung to the fields. Inside the homes, the light of the hearth was the first to return. The crackling of damp wood offered the day's first sounds, slow and muffled, like the world waking up from a long slumber. Chickens rustled, hooves of oxen shifted in muddy stalls, and beyond the shutters, dew softened every shape. This was a world ruled not by clocks, but by the slow procession of natural rhythms. The sun's steady rise, the toll of the church bell, the needs of the body. Peasants rose early. They washed their faces with chilled water, clothed themselves in rough-spun wool, and wrapped fingers around bread still hard from yesterday's crust. A few drops of hail, sour and mild, helped it go down. The village doctor, if one could call him that, might already be up, mixing herbs. A basket of dried tansy, a string of fennel, perhaps a few crumbling poppy heads left over from the last harvest. He didn't yet know that a strange coughing had begun 2 doors down, nor that it would spread quietly through the village within the week. Outside, carts groaned, pigs snorted in straw. A woman knelt near her door, fingers red from cold, scrubbing laundry with lye and ash. To the modern eye, it was a scene of hardship, but for those within it, this was the rhythm of life. Not easy, not painless, but familiar. And routine gave comfort, even in a world where disease might ride on the wind, and already in the cough of a child. In the way a man's eyes watered, in the way the baker seemed slower that morning, something was coming. But no one knew it yet. They only knew that the sun had risen, and that was reason enough to carry on. Herbs, humors, and healing hands. In this video, we step gently into a world where medicine lived not in hospitals, but in gardens, cloisters, and the memory of women who whispered to plants. Imagine a small wooden hut at the edge of a village, its walls leaning slightly with age. A narrow window lets in the dim afternoon light, just enough to illuminate rows of dried leaves hanging from ceiling beams. The air is heavy with the earthy perfume of rosemary, mugwort, and crushed thyme. This is where medicine began, not in textbooks, but in baskets. In medieval Europe, illness was not simply a matter of biology. It was a question of balance. The body, people believed, was governed by four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, each linked to a season, an emotion, an element. If you were angry too often, it might be a sign of too much yellow bile. If you were cold and pale and weeping, too much phlegm, perhaps. And so the healer, be it a midwife, a monk, or an apothecary, did not simply look for wounds. They listened, they observed, they placed fingers gently on the wrist and waited, feeling not just for a pulse, but for imbalance. In a convent garden, a Benedictine sister moved silently between rows of feverfew and betony. Her hands were calloused, her knees sore from kneeling in prayer. But her memory held generations of remedies. She knew that meadowsweet would ease aching joints, that elderberry could cool a fever, that the bitter roots of wormwood, boiled carefully, might chase the invisible worms said to crawl beneath children's skin. In the towns, barber surgeons sharpened their blades, not just for haircuts, but for bleeding, a popular treatment, a way to release the bad humors. Leeches were prized, scarification even more so. In darkened corners, a bowl of blood would be examined like a map, a clue to the body's disquiet. But not all healers were welcomed. In some villages, a wise woman might be feared as much as trusted. Her knowledge was seen as dangerous. If her remedies failed, or worked too well, she might be accused of witchcraft. And yet they still came to her. Mothers with coughing children, men with strange sores, old women with trembling limbs. Medicine was not separate from life. It was stitched into daily routine, into the herbs hung above the hearth, the ash rubbed into the scalp, the prayers whispered into the night. And beneath all this was a deep unspoken truth. They did not understand what caused illness, but they tried. And in their trying, they made meaning from the mystery. Strange ailments in village life, in the heart of the countryside, in villages that blurred into fields and forests. Illness was an old companion, not always spoken of, rarely understood, but always nearby, like a shadow at the edge of the firelight. It came in many forms. A man might awaken with swelling in his neck, a hard lump beneath the elsewhere. A child might begin to sing to herself in the middle of the night. Not a lullaby, but a repetitive hum, tuneless and strange. Her mother would place a damp cloth on her head, offer her blessed milk, and tuck her back into the straw. The humming would stop for a time, then begin again the next night. These were not the grand plagues, not yet. These were the quiet sicknesses, the ones that lingered in the breath of the baker, the ones that lived behind the weeping eyes of the smith's wife. Some ailments seemed to spread, slowly, house to house. A cough that deepened over weeks, a fatigue that couldn't be shaken. Others were sudden, a rash that bloomed overnight, limbs that twisted without reason. But what made many of these afflictions so frightening was not just the pain, but the strangeness. Imagine a girl who could no longer speak, her voice gone, though her throat was clear. Or a man who began to laugh uncontrollably, tears spilling down his cheeks, his body convulsing in rhythmless bursts. The villagers would murmur. Some blamed spirits. Others whispered of sins or of poisoned wells. Some said it was simply the will of God, and to question it was to invite worse. In winter, the sick stayed indoors. Smoke from the hearth mingled with the sharp scent of sickness. Sour breath, wet cloth, and earth. Neighbors left food at the door. The priest would come by, slowly, offering words of comfort. Sometimes a blessing, sometimes the final rites. The healer might arrive with a poultice, a warm compress of onion and mustard seed, perhaps a charm, a piece of iron worn against the skin. But cures were uncertain, recovery rarer still. And so life went on. Fields were tilled, bread was baked, children played even as others fell ill. Because to live in a medieval village was to live alongside suffering, and to accept that not all mysteries could be solved, only endured. The arrival of symptoms. Imagine then the first sign, the subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the body's usual harmony. A slight chill that lingers longer than morning dew. A heaviness in the limbs, as if the weight of the earth itself had settled on the shoulders. These small disturbances, easy to overlook, were the quiet heralds of illness. In a candlelit room, a woman might sit by the fire, her fingers tracing faint patterns on the rough wooden table. She feels a faint flutter within her chest, a quickening pulse that does not match the rhythm of her calm breath. Outside, the night stretches long, and the wind whispers through the cracks in the timber, carrying with it the scent of damp moss and cold stone. No one spoke immediately of sickness. To name it too soon was to invite fear. Instead, people moved carefully, watching shadows in the mirror, noting changes in the color of their skin, the way breath escaped in soft sighs. The village midwife, wise in years and remedies, would watch over the quiet suffering with patient eyes. She understood that the body often spoke in whispers before it shouted. A slight pallor beneath the eyes, a tongue coated faintly in the morning light, a restless sleep disturbed by dreams too vivid to ignore. These were signs, messages from a body beginning to falter. But their meaning was not always clear. Was it the cold? The humors out of balance? A curse, perhaps? Or the slow advance of something unseen, something that crept from neighbor to neighbor like a secret? People adapted. Doors were left open to the breeze. Linen was changed more often, if it could be spared. Water was boiled, though the reason for this was sometimes lost in old teachings and newer fears. Sometimes the sick whispered prayers to saints, hoping for mercy. Sometimes they said nothing at all. As the symptoms grew, so too did the weight of uncertainty. The familiar world seemed to tilt, the steady cadence of daily life interrupted by coughs that echoed down narrow streets, by the slow spread of tiredness that dulled bright eyes. And yet, life continued. The baker still kneaded dough, though his hands trembled. The children played beneath the watchful eye of the church steeple. The blacksmith's hammer rang out, a steady beat against the chill morning. Illness was a quiet companion, part of the landscape, as constant as the changing seasons. And it was here, in this fragile balance between health and decline, that the most bizarre diseases first found their foothold. Watching the body fail, In the dim glow of twilight, the rhythms of the day slow to a whisper. A man lies quiet upon a bed of straw, his breath shallow, the lines of worry and weariness deep upon his face. The family gathers close, their movements soft, careful not to disturb the fragile balance between life and the unknown beyond. To watch a body fail in the medieval world was to witness the slow unraveling of a once familiar landscape. The strength that once carried a plow, swung a hammer, or cradled a child, now faded like the last light of dusk. Fingers that once grasped firmly, now trembled or curled in unfamiliar ways. Eyes that had seen the vast fields and bright skies became glassy, distant. The sick were often cared for in the same rooms where life unfolded, children's laughter mingling with whispered prayers, the scent of burning herbs blending with the chill of evening air. Sometimes a rough cloth pressed gently to a fevered forehead. Sometimes a bowl of thick broth placed within reach, offered with hope and resignation. It was a time of watching and waiting. The healer's hands, though steady, could do little more than soothe. The priest's words offered comfort, a bridge between the earthly and the divine. And the family held fast to each other, their presence a quiet anchor amid the uncertainty. Yet even in decline, there was dignity. The simple act of breathing, the faint flutter of a heartbeat, carried meaning. The soft closing of eyes at last rest was a passage not just of pain, but of release. In these moments, the world felt both immense and intimate, a cycle of arrival and departure, shadow and light. The body's slow failure was not just an end, but a final chapter in a long, weathered story. And as night deepened, the village continued to breathe. Outside, the wind carried the faint rustle of leaves and the distant call of an owl. Inside, the quiet continued, a lullaby to the living and a gentle farewell to those who journeyed beyond. Saints in skin, Saint Cuthbert, Saint Roach. In this video, we turn our quiet gaze to the lives of those whose paths were shaped deeply by illness. Figures both revered and human, walking the fine line between suffering and sanctity. Imagine a cold, mist-laden morning in the Northumbrian hills. A solitary figure moves slowly among the rocky outcrops and dense woods. Saint Cuthbert. He was a man who lived simply, in harmony with the natural world, yet even he was not untouched by disease. And as night deepened, the village continued to breathe. Outside, the wind carried the faint rustle of leaves and the distant call of an owl. Inside, the quiet continued, a lullaby to the living, and a gentle farewell to those who journeyed beyond. Saints and skin, Saint Cuthbert, Saint Roch. In this video, we turn our quiet gaze to the lives of those whose paths were shaped deeply by illness. Figures both revered and human, walking the fine line between suffering and sanctity. Imagine a cold, mist-laden morning in the Northumbrian hills. A solitary figure moves slowly among the rocky outcrops and dense woods. Saint Cuthbert. He was a man who lived simply in harmony with the natural world, yet even he was not untouched by disease. It is said that he suffered from a painful affliction known as the disease of the bones, a condition that weakened him over many years. Despite this, he remained a shepherd of souls, tending not only to the spiritual needs of his flock, but also to the sick who came seeking comfort. His story, quiet and slow, reminds us that illness was not merely a private burden, but often a path to compassion and understanding. Those who suffered became figures of reverence, their endurance seen as a kind of silent strength. Further south, in the bustling towns and crowded streets of late medieval Europe, another figure's story quietly unfolded. Saint Roch, known for his work among plague victims. Legend tells of his miraculous survival after contracting the illness himself. His image, often depicted with a sore on his leg and a faithful dog by his side, became a symbol of hope in desperate times. He moved through villages and cities, offering aid and solace, walking among the afflicted when many turned away. The lives of these saints reveal a world where disease was intertwined with faith, where physical suffering was often understood as a test of spirit. Their stories spread slowly, carried in whispered prayers and the flickering light of votive candles. Yet beneath the reverence lay a reality familiar to all: the quiet endurance of the body, the soft courage needed to face the unknown, the fever that felled kings. In this video, we turn our attention to those who ruled from high towers and throne rooms. Kings and queens whose lives, though cloaked in power and ceremony, were as vulnerable to the strange illnesses of their time as the common folk. Imagine a grand chamber in a stone castle. Heavy tapestries hang on cold walls, and flickering candlelight casts dancing shadows across the faces of courtiers gathered nearby. He moved through villages and cities, offering aid and solace, walking among the afflicted when many turned away. The lives of these saints reveal a world where disease was intertwined with faith, where physical suffering was often understood as a test of spirit. Their stories spread slowly, carried in whispered prayers and the flickering light of votive candles. Yet beneath the reverence lay a reality familiar to all: the quiet endurance of the body, the soft courage needed to face the unknown, the fever that felled kings. In this video, we turn our attention to those who ruled from high towers and throne rooms, kings and queens whose lives, though cloaked in power and ceremony, were as vulnerable to the strange illnesses of their time as the common folk. Imagine a grand chamber in a stone castle. Heavy tapestries hang on cold walls, and flickering candlelight casts dancing shadows across the faces of courtiers gathered nearby. At the center lies a monarch, pale and still, sweat dampening the fine linens beneath him. Medieval Europe was no stranger to fevers that came swiftly and with terrible force. One such malady, known to some as the sweating sickness, swept through the courts and towns in the late 15th and early 16th centuries. It arrived suddenly, an invisible shadow that struck without warning. Those afflicted were gripped by chills and intense sweating, dizziness, and weakness that could render even the strongest man helpless within hours. Kings, princes, and nobles were not immune. Their privilege offered some protection: isolated chambers, better food, and the attention of the most skilled healers, but it did not guarantee survival. One monarch, known to history for his sudden demise, fell victim to this fever. At the center lies a monarch, pale and still, sweat dampening the fine linens beneath him. Medieval Europe was no stranger to fevers that came swiftly and with terrible force. One such malady, known to some as the sweating sickness, swept through the courts and towns in the late 15th and early 16th centuries. It arrived suddenly, an invisible shadow that struck without warning. Those afflicted were gripped by chills and intense sweating, dizziness, and weakness that could render even the strongest man helpless within hours. Kings, princes, and nobles were not immune. Their privilege offered some protection: isolated chambers, better food, and the attention of the most skilled healers, but it did not guarantee survival. One monarch, known to history for his sudden demise, fell victim to this fever. The halls that once echoed with the sounds of celebration fell silent, replaced by hushed whispers and prayers. The fever's mysterious nature puzzled physicians. They sought answers in the stars, in the balance of humors, and in ancient texts, but the disease remained elusive. Treatments ranged from bloodletting to fragrant herbs burned in the air, but none could halt its swift course. The story of this fever is a reminder that, regardless of crown or status, all were connected by the fragile thread of life, and that illness could erase the boundary between ruler and subject in a single breath. The quiet work of the plague doctors. In this video, we find ourselves amid the silent figures who moved cautiously through streets shadowed by fear and sorrow. The plague doctors. Clad in long robes, their faces hidden behind bird-like masks, they became a symbol both of dread and of quiet, persistent care. Imagine narrow, cobbled streets, slick with rain, winding through a town thick with the scent of damp stone and smoke. Doors are closed tightly, windows shuttered against the chill. Yet within, some dwellers fall ill, their breaths shallow, their bodies frail. Plague doctors were few but determined. Their masks, filled with aromatic herbs like lavender and rosemary, were believed to guard against the miasma, the noxious air thought to carry disease. The long beaks also kept a distance between doctor and patient, a silent barrier amid a world rife with uncertainty. Their work was slow and deliberate. They recorded symptoms, tended to the dying, and sometimes performed rudimentary surgeries or bloodletting. They moved from house to house, their footsteps muffled by the thick fog that often lingered in the early morning. Though their tools and knowledge were limited, their presence brought a small measure of hope, a gesture of care amid widespread suffering. Some were monks, others scholars, yet all shared the quiet burden of facing death day after day. Theirs was not a story of triumph, but of endurance, a steady rhythm of compassion against the backdrop of loss. The dancing plague of Strasbourg. In this video, we turn to one of the most curious and mysterious events of the medieval world. A sudden, unyielding dance that gripped the streets of Strasbourg in 1518. A dance that lasted for days, and for some, until their bodies gave way. Imagine narrow, winding lanes filled with the soft murmur of daily life. Suddenly, one woman steps into the square and begins to move, her feet tapping an erratic rhythm on the stone, her arms lifted as if led by an unseen force. Others join her, and soon dozens are caught in the same strange compulsion. The dance was not joyous or festive, but frantic and exhausting. The dancers moved with no rest, their bodies racked by relentless movement. Some collapsed from sheer exhaustion. Others seemed oblivious to pain, driven by a force they could neither resist nor explain. In the eyes of the townsfolk, the plague was both terrifying and bewildering. Explanations ranged from divine punishment to possession by spirits. Physicians and clergy alike sought remedies, prayers, music, and attempts to isolate the dancers. Yet the strange epidemic persisted for weeks. Today, historians and doctors speculate on causes ranging from mass hysteria to poisoning or neurological disorders. But for those who witnessed it, the dancing plague was a haunting and inexplicable chapter, a reminder that the human body and mind could respond to fear and suffering in ways both profound and perplexing. And so, the city eventually returned to silence. The dancers ceased, their bodies marked by fatigue and relief. Life's rhythm slowed once more, leaving behind questions that echo faintly through the corridors of history. The madness of monarchs. In this video, we look quietly at a shadowed corner of history, the fragile minds of rulers, touched by illness, isolation, and the weight of power. Imagine the high walls of a castle, its stone towers rising against a gray sky. Within, a king sits alone in a chamber, his gaze distant, his thoughts tangled. The crown weighs heavy, not just with authority, but with unseen burdens. In medieval Europe, mental illness was poorly understood. Conditions we might now recognize, depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, were often explained as possession, divine punishment, or the influence of humors unbalanced. Some monarchs suffered in silence. Others displayed sudden fits of anger, withdrawal, or confusion that unsettled courts and counselors alike. One king, whose story lingers in whispered chronicles, spent long years confined, his mind a maze from which he could not escape. The madness of kings was both a personal tragedy and a political crisis. It shaped decisions, alliances, and the fate of nations. Yet behind the grandeur and intrigue lay a simple human reality, a mind struggling beneath the immense weight of expectation and disease. Courtiers might speak softly, guards might watch closely, but the lonely journey of these rulers reminds us that illness does not discriminate. It touches the powerful and the powerless alike, weaving a quiet thread through the fabric of history. Bones of the leper dead. In this video, we move quietly into the shadowed world of leprosy, a disease that shaped both the living and the dead in medieval Europe. Imagine an ancient cemetery, silent except for the soft rustle of wind through bare trees. Weathered stones mark the resting places of those once marked by a visible and feared affliction. Leprosy was known by many names and was feared for its slow, creeping nature. Those afflicted were often separated from their communities, sent to live in leper houses or isolated villages. Yet beneath the fear was a reality often forgotten, the lived experience of the sufferers, their daily struggles, and their humanity. Archaeologists today uncover the bones of the leper dead, worn and fragile, revealing signs of illness long past. The remains tell stories of deformities, of hardship, but also of care. Some cemeteries, the placement of graves shows that even in death, those with leprosy were not always abandoned, but sometimes buried with respect. These silent bones speak across centuries, reminding us of the lives shaped by disease and the complex relationship between fear, stigma, and compassion. Saint Anthony's fire and holy terror. In this part, we delve into the strange and unsettling affliction known as Saint Anthony's fire. Anthony's fire, a disease that consumed the body with burning sensations and deep pain, yet was wrapped in layers of mystery and spiritual fear. Imagine the dim interior of a medieval chapel, lit by flickering candles, where sufferers sought solace and hope. The air is thick with incense and whispered prayers. Outside, The fields are green, but shadowed by fear. For those afflicted are thought to carry a mark not only of illness, but of divine punishment. St. Anthony's fire, now understood as ergotism, caused by a poisonous fungus growing on rye, was feared for its horrifying symptoms, burning sensations, convulsions, and hallucinations that filled the minds of the afflicted with terror. Medieval people saw these symptoms as signs of holy wrath or possession. Pilgrimages to the shrine of St. Anthony became a beacon of hope, where the faithful sought healing through prayer, fasting, and ritual. Hospitals run by the Order of St. Anthony cared for the afflicted with a mixture of compassion and awe, their work slow and somber. This disease is a reminder of how closely medicine and faith were intertwined in medieval Europe, how illness was understood through the lens of both body and spirit, and how the boundaries between the natural and the supernatural often blurred. Werewolves, rabies, and shapeshifters. In this part, we wander softly into a world where illness and legend entwined, a place where the strange behaviors of the sick were often explained through tales of transformation and the supernatural. Imagine a cold forest edge beneath a silver moon, shadows stretching long and dark. In village hearths, stories were told of men and women who changed shape, who roamed the night as beasts, fierce and untamed. These were the werewolves, figures born from fear and mystery, but also from misunderstood sickness. Rabies, a deadly viral disease spread by the bite of a mad dog or wolf, caused symptoms that might be mistaken for the supernatural. Victims became restless, aggressive, sometimes unable to drink water, their minds clouded by delirium. Such transformations fed into legends of shapeshifters, blending medicine with myth. Villagers reacted with a mix of dread and fascination. Some believed that curses or possession were at work. Others sought protection in charms, holy water, or the cutting of locks of hair. These stories reveal the ways medieval Europe tried to make sense of the unknown, blending observation with imagination. Illness was not just physical. It carried meaning woven into the fabric of culture and belief. The boundaries between man and beast, between health and madness, were blurred. And in this twilight, fear and understanding walked hand in hand. The delusion of glass bodies. In this video, we explore a peculiar and haunting condition once thought to afflict certain medieval individuals. A fragile, mysterious ailment known as glass delusion. Picture a quiet chamber where a noble sits cautiously, moving with deliberate care, as if the slightest misstep might shatter the very bones beneath their skin. The belief was that some bodies were as delicate and breakable as glass, vulnerable to splintering from the gentlest touch or sudden movement. This strange affliction, recorded in various courtly diaries and letters, was more than a physical ailment. It was deeply entwined with the mind. Those who suffered often lived in fear, guarding themselves against imagined fragility, retreating from the world, lest they be broken. The delusion of glass bodies reveals much about medieval understandings of the human condition, the fragile balance between body and mind, the power of belief, and the ways mental and physical health were deeply connected. Though we now see this condition as psychological, in its time it was a real and terrifying experience for those who lived it. It reminds us, softly, that the human story is as much about the mind's landscapes as the body's. The silent spread of tuberculosis. In this part, we turn to a slow and quiet adversary, tuberculosis, a disease that crept softly through medieval towns and villages, leaving a trail of subtle decline rather than sudden collapse. Imagine the narrow streets of a bustling medieval town, the stone walls weathered by centuries. Inside humble homes, the air is thick with the scent of burning wood and damp wool. A woman coughs gently at first, a sound barely noticed among the clatter of daily life. But over weeks and months, her strength fades. Her cheeks become pale, her breaths more labored. Tuberculosis was a disease of time and endurance. Unlike sudden fevers or violent illnesses, it whispered slowly, stealing breath and vitality through persistent cough and weariness. The infected often hid their suffering, as symptoms could be mistaken for weakness or sorrow. The cause was unknown, the disease invisible. It passed quietly from person to person, carried in close contact and crowded homes. Treatment was limited, focusing on rest, fresh air when possible, and herbal remedies that offered comfort rather than cure. In art and literature, tuberculosis was sometimes called the consumption, a word that hints at the gradual fading of life. For many, it was a quiet journey, marked by resilience and silent pain. The story of tuberculosis in medieval Europe reminds us that not all illness arrives with noise or spectacle. Some diseases move gently, weaving into the fabric of life and leaving their mark in soft shadows. The castle and the peasant's hovel. In this part, we begin to explore the contrasting worlds of medieval society, where the grand stone walls of castles stood in quiet contrast to the humble wooden hovels of peasants, and illness touched all. Though imagine a towering castle perched atop a hill, its thick walls shielding lords and ladies from the chill wind. Inside, tapestries muted the sounds of footsteps. Oil lamps flickered softly in spacious chambers furnished with carved wood and woven fabrics. Here illness was met with private chambers, attendants at the ready, and sometimes the wisest healers money could summon. Just beyond the castle's shadow, a village of peasants lies nestled against rolling fields. Their homes are small, with thatched roofs and walls plastered with mud and straw. Smoke curls from low chimneys, carrying the scent of hearth fires and drying herbs. Here, sickness was a neighbor, a frequent visitor. Rooms were shared, space was scarce, and fresh air often a luxury. Disease did not discriminate, but its experience differed. In the castle, a fever might be treated with scented waters, poultices of rare herbs, or prayers whispered by a chaplain. The sick were tended to closely, sometimes isolated to prevent spread. In the village, care was often practical. A warm broth, a cloth pressed to a fevered brow, the comforting presence of family. Yet, both worlds faced fear and uncertainty. The castle's grandeur could not shield from sudden collapse. The peasants' resilience was tested by lack of resources. Both knew the fragility of life. This contrast reminds us that medieval illness was woven into the social fabric, shaping lives across every level of society. Convents as centers of care. We turn to the quiet spaces of medieval convents, where stone walls sheltered women who devoted their lives to prayer, work, and the care of the sick. Imagine a cloistered garden, bathed in soft morning light, the scent of blooming herbs mingling with the gentle murmur of chants drifting through arched windows. Here, nuns moved with calm purpose, tending infirmaries, preparing remedies, and offering comfort with gentle hands. Convents often served as places of healing, especially for those who could not afford the care of physicians or apothecaries. The sisters cultivated gardens filled with medicinal plants, lavender, sage, and valerian among them, used to create salves, teas, and poultices. Within the cool stone chambers, the sick found refuge. The nuns attended with steady patience, washing wounds, nursing fevers, and providing quiet companionship. Their knowledge, passed down through generations, blended practical healing with spiritual care. The rhythms of convent life, prayer, work, and rest, offered a structured sanctuary. Here, illness was met not only with remedies, but with rituals of hope and faith. The presence of the sacred was woven into every gesture, a soft shield against despair. Though often hidden from the bustle of towns and courts, convents were vital centers where the mysteries of healing and compassion quietly unfolded. A life of a medieval apothecary. We step quietly into the shop of the medieval apothecary, a place where herbs, powders, and potions mingled with the scent of earth and spice, and where knowledge was held in jars and scrolls. Imagine a small, dimly lit room lined with wooden shelves, each holding glass vials filled with colorful powders and dried plants. The apothecary moves slowly, fingers tracing labels worn by time, eyes scanning texts written in careful script. The air is thick with the fragrance of cinnamon, cloves, and bitter roots. The apothecary's role was a blend of healer, pharmacist, and sometimes alchemist. Their knowledge came from texts passed down through centuries, often from Greek and Arabic scholars, and from hands-on experience with remedies. People from near and far came to seek help. Farmers with aches, mothers with sick children, nobles with mysterious fevers. The apothecary prepared medicines from roots and flowers, mixing tinctures with gentle care. Some remedies soothed pain, others aimed to balance the humors believed to govern health. Yet the apothecary's work was cautious. Many treatments were experimental, guided by observation rather than certainty. Mistakes were possible, but so was relief. This quiet profession stood at the crossroads of science, nature, and tradition. It was a world where patience and attentiveness were as vital as the herbs themselves. The plight of the poor in sickness. We stepped softly into the humble homes of the poor, the crowded, chilly spaces where illness often found fertile ground and where care was scarce and uncertain. Imagine a cramped cottage, its walls thin and weathered, with a hearth barely able to chase away the damp chill. Within, a family huddles close, faces marked by weariness. The air is heavy with the scent of smoke and unwashed cloth, mingling with the faint bitterness of herbal infusions. For the poor, sickness was a constant shadow. Malnutrition, poor sanitation, and crowded living conditions made the spread of disease swift and merciless. Simple fevers could become fatal, and the cost of a healer's visit was often beyond reach. Care came mostly from family and neighbors. A mother might press cool cloths to a fevered brow. An elder might offer a poultice made from garden herbs. But without access to medicines or physicians, many illnesses went untreated or worsened in silence. Churches and charitable institutions sometimes provided aid, food, shelter, and prayers, but resources were limited, and the needs many. Imagine a spacious chamber warmed by a roaring fire, its walls hung with rich tapestries and polished armor. A lord or lady reclines upon a carved wooden bed, attended by servants and physicians alike. Fine linens soften the harshness of illness. Delicate scents from scented oils fill the air. Nobles benefited from better food, cleaner water, and access to learned doctors. Their illnesses were treated with remedies rare and expensive, imported spices, distilled waters, and elaborate poultices. Isolation in comfortable chambers was possible, reducing the risk of contagion. Yet privilege offered no guarantee. Even the wealthiest were vulnerable to sudden fevers, prolonged wasting diseases, and the mysterious ailments that defied cure. The high mortality among noble children reminds us of the limits of medicine in this era. The lives of nobles during sickness were marked by ritual as much as treatment. Prayers, processions, and blessings sought divine intervention alongside earthly remedies. Illness was both a personal trial and a public event. This glimpse into noble illness reveals the paradox of medieval life, where comfort and danger walked side by side, and where the frailty of the body was a reminder of human vulnerability regardless of status. Aftermath and memory. In this part, we gently turn our attention to the quiet echoes left behind after the storms of illness. The ways communities remembered, mourned, and moved forward. Imagine a village square touched by soft evening light. Graves are freshly turned, and simple wooden crosses mark the resting places of those taken too soon. Around them, life continues. The soft murmur of voices, the rustling of leaves, the distant toll of a bell. After disease swept through, families carried memories, both tender and heavy. Stories were told not only of loss, but of endurance. The rhythms of daily life slowly resumed, shaped forever by absence. Communities built hospitals and almshouses, places of refuge for the ill and poor. Shrines and chapels rose in honor of saints believed to intercede for the sick. Rituals of remembrance became woven into the fabric of faith and culture. Yet the scars of illness lingered. In bodies weakened, in spirits tempered by sorrow, and in the land itself. The memory of disease shaped art, literature, and belief, becoming a quiet part of the medieval world's landscape, both a warning and a comfort. The rise of quarantine and public health. In this video, we explore the gradual awakening of communities to the need for collective protection. The early steps toward quarantine and public health measures in medieval Europe. Imagine a bustling port city. Ships arriving with cargo and travelers from distant lands. The streets hum with the sounds of merchants, sailors, and townsfolk. Yet beneath this vitality lies a quiet tension. The fear of unseen sickness carried by those arriving on foreign waters. In response to repeated waves of disease, towns began to institute rules. Ships were held at bay, travelers quarantined in isolated areas, and markets regulated to limit the spread of contagion. The word quarantine itself, derived from the Italian 40 giorni, meaning 40 days, speaks of these early efforts. Public health was born from observation, trial, and necessity. Officials sought to protect the many by restricting movement, cleansing streets, and controlling waste. Signs and guards marked infected houses, and those afflicted were sometimes sent to isolated laser houses. These measures were imperfect and often met with resistance, but they represent a turning point, a slow recognition that illness was not solely an individual's burden, but a communal challenge. The rise of quarantine marks the beginning of society's cautious steps toward managing disease, blending fear, compassion, and pragmatism. In this video, we trace the slow and deliberate changes in how medieval Europe understood illness, a journey from ancient beliefs toward more empirical observation. Imagine a quiet scriptorium where monks laboriously copy manuscripts by candlelight. Ancient texts from Greece, Rome, and the Islamic world are studied and translated, their knowledge seeping slowly into European medicine. The hum of quills and the scent of parchment fill the air. Medical thought in the Middle Ages was rooted in the theory of humors, the balance of blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile that shaped health and disease. Physicians sought to restore this balance through diet, bloodletting, and herbal remedies. Yet, alongside these traditions, new observations began to emerge. Scholars like Avicenna and later European physicians introduced ideas about contagion and hygiene. The university medical schools of places like Salerno and Montpellier became centers for learning and debate. Though limited by the tools and knowledge of their time, medieval doctors showed curiosity and care, attempting to understand disease beyond superstition. This evolution laid groundwork that centuries later would blossom into modern medicine, a gradual unfolding from myth to method. Art and literature inspired by disease. In this section, we turn our attention to the quieter reflections of medieval life. How disease left its mark, not only on bodies, but on the very expressions of culture. Imagine illuminated manuscripts, their pages alive with delicate illustrations, figures cloaked in robes, angels guiding souls, scenes of healing and despair rendered in vibrant colors. The flicker of candlelight brings these images softly to life. Throughout the medieval period, illness and death inspired a wealth of art and literature. The Danse Macabre, or Dance of Death, was a haunting motif reminding all, kings and peasants alike, of life's fragile nature and the inevitability of mortality. Painted on church walls and carved into tombs, it was both a meditation and a comfort. Poets and writers wove tales of plague, suffering, and hope, their words echoing the rhythms of a world marked by uncertainty. These works often blended spiritual reflection with vivid descriptions of human endurance. Even music carried the shadow of disease, with plaintive melodies and chants sung in quiet chapels, offering solace. Through art and literature, the experience of disease was transformed into memory, warning, and at times, gentle consolation. The comfort of the present. In this passage today, medicine is a steady light, guiding us through health and illness alike. Knowledge and care have grown, weaving safety and understanding into the fabric of our lives. We draw our quiet journey to a close, reflecting on the distance between past and present, and the comfort found in the world we now inhabit. Imagine a modern room bathed in soft light, the gentle hum of life around you. The world is different now, yet echoes of the past remain. The struggles of those who lived through mysterious and strange illnesses have shaped the path to this moment. Today, medicine is a steady light, guiding us through health and illness alike. Knowledge and care have grown, weaving safety and understanding into the fabric of our lives. As you listen, imagine the contrast. The chill winds of medieval streets replaced by warmth. The uncertainty softened by science. The solitary suffering met now with communities of support. The past, with all its shadows, invites us to rest in the comfort of the present, to find peace in progress, and gentle hope for tomorrow. Historian Couch signs off.